It's been a dreadful last few days of economic news for millions of households, thanks to rising fuel bills. And next week, there's more misery as taxes go up, with much of the West trying to wean itself off Russian oil and gas, straining global supplies. Just how much worse could things get? A very good morning to you, with bigger utility bills already here and a national insurance rise due next week. I'll be asking the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, if he thinks the cost of living could get significantly worse. As Russia pulls back from some frontline positions in northern Ukraine, revealing how they've behaved in occupied areas, President Zelensky's spokesman will explain why he's warning the war is far from over. To talk about Labour's answer to the rising cost of living, the Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds will be here, and the actor Eddie Marsan will be talking about his new drama based on the true story of the canoeist who staged his own death.
All I ever wanted was a simple life.
I'm going to fake my death. What could be simpler?
Joining me to talk about the big stories of the week and look at this morning's papers, the Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine and the Atlantic magazine's Helen Lewis. But first, the news with Chris Mason. Morning.
Morning to you, Clive. Ukraine says its forces have regained control of the entire Kyiv region 5 weeks after Russia launched its invasion. But as Moscow's forces retreat, there is growing evidence of civilian killings. Reporters in the town of Bucha outside Kyiv have found at least 20 bodies strewn in the streets. Officials in the Ukrainian port of Odessa say it's been hit by missile strikes as Russia focuses assault on southern and eastern parts of the country. Eyewitnesses in the city have described seeing smoke and fires. Odessa has escaped largely unscathed during the conflict, but it's viewed as strategically important for Ukraine's ability to trade. The Conservative Party has suspended the MP David Warburton following claims about his conduct. Sources have told the BBC that 3 allegations of sexual harassment are being investigated. Mr Warburton, who represents Somerton and Frome in Somerset, has not responded to a BBC request for comment. Travellers are facing a weekend of delays and disruption at airports and on ferry services across the UK, just as the Easter holidays get underway for many. Motorists in Dover have reported delays of more than 6 hours, while queues at Manchester Airport caused some passengers to miss their flights. And in sport, England are finding the going tough in the Women's Cricket World Cup final. Australia punished the bowlers, setting a record target of 357 for England to chase. That is all for me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Clive.
OK, Chris, thank you for that. Chris Mason there. We're going to have a look at some of the front pages now. We're going to start with the Sunday Times. They're reporting allegations of sexual harassment against the Conservative MP David Warburton. He's been suspended from the party and the incidents are being investigated. The paper has also separate allegations about drug use and an undeclared loan. On to the Mail on Sunday. The same story there. Tory MP in sex and cocaine sting. Onto the front page of the Observer. Tories fear poll disaster over high taxes. We may get into a little bit of that with Grant Shapps a little bit later on. Onto the Sunday Express. Seize back stolen billions to cut tax. Again, for the Conservatives there. Onto the Sunday Telegraph. The PM's plan for 7 nuclear power stations. We're expecting the government's energy strategy to be published fairly shortly. And then the Sunday Mirror there. Hypocrite Raab failed to stop baby P mum release. Sarah and Helen are here. Helen, we're going to start with the Observer with you. Allegations there concerning the way that Russian forces have been behaving in areas that they've occupied in northern Ukraine. They're pulling back now. They've been forced back, and we're seeing the results of what their occupation has meant.
Yeah, I think these reports have been really shocking. I mean, there was a report on Friday from Jeremy Bowen where they managed to track down the body of a man who had been seen on drone footage being shot while having his hands up and surrendering. And similar reports are now coming out from other areas around Kyiv. You know, the idea of people with their hands and feet bound have been shot in the back of the head, for example. And this does pose an enormous challenge to the West and to NATO and the alliances. What kind of justice can the people who are left behind possibly expect while Vladimir Putin is still in power? But I think if the Russians do continue to withdraw or regroup, then we will be seeing more of this in the coming days.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, the point that Jeremy Bowen made in that piece on Friday was that civilians are accorded rights even in the middle of a war.
Absolutely, and it's not just, I mean, it's not just reports of torture and of booby trapping dead bodies. There's also been lots of reports of gang rapes and, you know, attacks on very young girls, and I mean, just appalling behaviour. I mean, I don't know whether it's to do with the fact that the Russian troops are so demoralised that they're just behaving in such a terrible way, but I mean, you know, all of this is provable. We have footage. We have, you know, there's no question that serious war crimes are being committed here.
Well, we know that the International Criminal Court already has opened a book on the situation in Ukraine, so we may get a little bit more on that. Sarah, the front page of the Telegraph: Prime Minister's plan for 7 nuclear power stations.
I know. I think they're mini nuclear power stations.
Little ones.
Little tiny baby ones. I mean, obviously the energy crisis has become extremely acute, not just because prices are going up, but because there's going to be a shortage of it. So obviously he has to have some kind of response. The difficulty is knowing what you can actually do in the short term to ease people's pain. I mean, I don't think it's, I'm not an expert, but I think it takes a while to build a nuclear power station. And even if you want to put up wind farms and stuff, you've got to there's lots of obstacles like planning permission and stuff, which he's going to have to cut corners with. I mean, I suppose, you know, he was very successful in pushing through a fast program for the vaccine. You know, he was good at sort of riding over red tape to do that. So maybe he'll take this approach, which is just, look, we just need to get this done. Let's just do it. But there will be pushback, I'm sure. I think in the meantime, we all have a sort of slight duty to try and turn off the lights a bit. My teenagers particularly. I'm saying this on national television. Please turn off the lights when you go to bed at night, and don't leave the freezer open. You know, I think we've all got.
It's all happening in the Vine household, isn't it?
We've all got so used to. I think, you know, especially the younger generation. I mean, I'm very old, so I can remember 3-day week in the 70s, just about. You know. With you know, no power cuts and stuff. I mean, that is quite hard.
I think that for me, I've been thinking about, I've been reading a lot about the 1970s, and that is a decade marked by fears about inflation, and that just in the time that I've been covering politics hasn't been, you know, actually anywhere really in the public discussion. And now it is, you know, I think in this month, I think not just with the energy price cap, but lots of people perhaps, you know, their phone contracts coming up, you know, their nursery fees are coming back up. All of these things that have just crept up by inflation, plus the little bit of headroom that companies are putting on because they think inflation is going to carry on going.
And also, of course, cost of food, I mean, which is going through the roof. I mean, I was listening to the chief executive of Iceland the other day, and he's just doing his best, but I mean, it is very difficult to keep the prices down. And this is going to lead on to our next story. But
well, there was an extraordinary story this morning about the fact that 75% of Britain's sunflower oil is processed through one factory in Erith in Kent, and you know, they've only got a couple of weeks of it left. So we're talking about now companies having to reformulate. You know,
it's actually the most read story on the BBC at the moment. I think
we found out that people love biscuits, and I think I applaud them for that. But you know, we're talking about having to change the kind of very basics of the food that we eat because of the fact that most of the sunflowers are coming from Ukraine and Russia, and that they would now be planting next season.
So this is not something that's going to be a temporary thing. Next year, there's going to be no crops of any of this stuff, you know. And maybe the year after, because the Russians are covering everything in mines. I mean, who knows how long it's going to take for that country to get.
And it's important to remember that the World Food Programme actually gets the majority of its supplies to distribute through the developing world from Ukraine and Russia. So one has to worry about that. We're going to go on to the story on the front page of The Sun there. It involves the Conservative MP, David Warburton, suspended from the party. There's an investigation being conducted by the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, the body set up by Parliament 3 years ago to make it easier for staff to complain about allegations of harassment.
Yeah, that was set up in the wake of a whole spate of Me Too allegations, and it was decided really that it was impossible for MPs to keep investigating themselves. So there is now an independent expert panel.
And he denies all the allegations. We've got to
these
make
are
that clear.
allegations that he's entitled to due process, but the interesting thing is that the way that investigation will now happen is different to how it was 5-10 years ago. And it was the independent panel that recommended John Bercow, for example, be censured in the way he was over those bullying claims, which it found to be proven. One of the things I find most interesting about this is that he was elected in 2015 for the first time, which means that he employs his wife in his office. She's in charge of HR. Now, if he had been elected in 2017 or after, you are no longer allowed to employ family members. And that is, two of these complainants worked in his office and they were expected to take their complaints to the boss's wife. And that's symptomatic of me of the way that we've now had to try and start to professionalise Parliament and make it function more like a normal workplace.
Yeah, I mean, he says that he's responded, he's not responded to the BBC, but he's responded to the Telegraph, and he said that he has an enormous amount of defence.
And he's
let's see it. Let's see it. I mean, I think it's it's very difficult. People have crises in their life. I mean, he's lost 8 stone. I mean, I can't help feeling that this is a bit of a sort of midlife. Maybe it's a bit of a midlife crisis. Not crisis. I mean, losing 8 stone is a good thing. But maybe it's just he's had a juncture in his life. But the trouble with being an MP is that you are in public office, and therefore, if you do things like this, it has to be scrutinised. I mean, I feel sorry for him. It must be awful. But
I think that's the other half of the complainant process, isn't it? It's the fact that actually MPs often will say they feel very unsupported. It can be a very lonely job.
It is.
And I think it would help, both sides of this equation if there was actually more support there.
I do think the House of Commons should be formalised in its sort of HR. Having your wife working for you is not ideal.
OK, well, the allegations are being investigated. Let's go to the front page of the Sunday Times there. Actually, it's page 10 and 11, the Shipman Partygate story.
Well, so the first tranche of fixed penalty notices have gone out for the Downing Street parties, and there is already a little bit of disquiet about who's getting named and who's getting not named. So we know the names of the person, for example, whose leaving party instigated this first round of complaints. And Dominic Cummings, who has appointed himself the nemesis of the Prime Minister, is very angry about this. I think other people are too, saying, it's not really fair for deputy heads to roll. All these junior people are being named, but actually really this is about a culture that was set at the top. And are we going to hear more about the really senior people? Those are the people perhaps who should be facing consequences, rather than a junior employee who might have felt, in the same, we're talking about, pressurisation at work, who might have felt pressured to go along to something when everybody
or just a young
did.
person who probably didn't think it through. I think a lot of people working in that environment are very young. They're sort of in their early 20s. I think ultimately the only way you're really going to draw a line under this is if you're just completely transparent and honest about it. Just say, look, these are the people who've been fined. This is what's happened. We're really sorry about it. It was a terrible misjudgment and a huge mistake. We're sorry. We've paid our fines. We'll take responsibility and move on.
But what about Labour's suggestion that if Carrie has been found to have received one of these notices and has been fined, that should be made public? Do you think that's the case?
I think it would be better. I mean, to be perfectly honest, if it was me, I would just.
She's not a politician. She's not a minister.
No, but she lives in Number 10, and
Do you agree with Labour on this?
She sort of that's. It's part of the whole thing. I just think it's better for them to just be honest about it. I really do, because otherwise I think this is really going to come up on the doorsteps a lot, and I think it's just if you can't be seen to be dodging questions. You've just got to be honest and say yes, it was a terrible. I'm sorry, I messed up. End of.
I think it has, although the acute threat to Boris Johnson's position has gone away, I think it has fed into a wider discontent which will come out during the cost of living discussion throughout the rest of the year, which is the kind of, I'm not being able to have a pint at the weekend, but you had a suitcase of booze. I think
Labour are asking they want Carrie to be named for very malicious reasons, because that's how Labour operate, obviously, because they're the opposition. But I think from her own point of view, if it was me in that position, I would just want to be honest and say, yes, I made a mistake, I'm really sorry, I've paid the fine.
All right, OK. Finally, I don't know if I passed this test. I haven't looked at it properly yet. Page 22 of the Telegraph. Would you pass the BBC's class test, Sarah?
It's the poshometer.
Yes.
The poshometer. So the BBC have said very nobly that they want to employ, I think it's 25% of people from low. I don't know what to say anymore. Do you say
Lower socioeconomic background,
Okay,
I
thank
think, is the
you.
accepted jargon.
That's
Thank
accepted.
you. I'm bound to get it wrong. I don't know, but it's very funny. The Telegraph have done it very well, and they've got 3 of their writers, basically scrutinising their own poshness or lack of. There's not a lot of lack of poshness, I have to say. I mean, one of the things is what were your parents doing when you were 14? I think my parents were mostly drunk, but that's probably quite a rude thing to say. What were your parents doing?
My parents were a teacher and a factory manager, but I think it's really hard.
I think you qualify then.
No, I don't, because I went to private school, and I think this is what's interesting about the way we talk about class now. My grandfather was a coal miner, and I went to private school. That is a story of social mobility across the 20th century, but it does make these conversations harder than they would have been 50 years ago.
I mean, it's just very hard to classify people along those lines, isn't it? Because individuals...
Do you have an Arga?
No,
There we
I
go.
do not have an Arga.
At least you're not. I think that's upper
Do you have an
class,
Arga?
and that's- No, I live in London.
I'd love an Arga. To be honest, I would love an Arga. A nice coloured, brightly coloured one, but no.
All
I
right.
don't have an Arga. Do you have an
Okay.
Arga, Clive?
I do not have an Arga. And I am being particularly accurate in that representation. Thank you, Helen and Sarah. Thanks for that. Now, certainly been a cold start to April so far. Let's find out if things are going to warm up. I sincerely hope so. Thomas Schaffenacker has the details. Hi there, Thomas.
Clive, hi. Yeah, certainly going to warm up over the next few days, but very, very chilly indeed. In fact, let's have a look at the temperatures over the last 24 hours or so. And in Sennybridge, it was actually -7 degrees Celsius, which is the lowest April night temperature for around 9 years, and even in central London it was well below freezing. So here's the outlook then for the next 24 hours or so. Bright today, but then tomorrow we're expecting some rain. In fact, the rain is already going to reach parts of northern and central Scotland, as well as the east of Northern Ireland, but across England and Wales it's going to be a mixture of sunny spells and also a few showers. 10 degrees today. And then tonight, the weather fronts move across the UK. You can see outbreaks of rain spreading right across the country. A very mild night. Temperatures 5 degrees in London, 8 degrees in Glasgow, at least very mild compared to what we just had. And then tomorrow, it's a cloudy picture right across the country. Outbreaks of rain almost at any time. Perhaps a few glimmers of sunshine around the eastern coasts, maybe central southern England too. And take a look at the temperatures. 15 degrees in London, 12 degrees in Glasgow, and the following days will be unsettled and staying relatively mild. Clive, it's back to you.
Thomas, thank you for that. Thomas Schaffenacker there. Now, President Zelensky of Ukraine has said Russian forces are withdrawing slowly but noticeably from around the capital Kyiv and the northern city of Chernihiv. But he and his Western allies warn that Russia's renewed focus on seizing parts of the south and east of Ukraine means many more battles ahead and misery for civilians. Let's speak now to President Zelensky's spokesman, Sergey Nikiforov. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us about what you found in places like Bucha and other areas that the Russians have actually retreated from?
Oh, that's really hard to describe what we have found in the recently deoccupied territories like Bucha, like Hostomel, like Irpin. These images are really they are heartbreaking. We found mass graves filled with civilians. We found people with their hands and with their legs tied up, if it's do I say it correctly, tied up, and was bullet holes at the back of their heads. So they were clearly civilians, and they were executed. We found half-burned bodies, as if somebody tried to hide their crimes, but they didn't have enough time to do it properly. So these corpses are only half burned, and it's only the first the first assessment of the situation. I mean, these images are really horrible, and right now our troops, actually the whole Kiev region, we say Kiev Oblast, right? Kiev region is deoccupied, is free from Russian troops, and our militaries are now not investigating, but how to say, clearing it up, searching for mines, searching for maybe some snipers or whatever could the Russian troops leave behind themselves.
Okay, do you believe then what you found could amount to war crimes?
It looks exactly, I'm not, I have to be very careful with my wording, but it looks exactly like war crimes. I mean, I know that Human Rights Watch is investigating. I don't know if they're in the field directly, but they're investigating photos and some other video evidences. I know that International Criminal Court is very dedicated to persuade all the war criminals, and I hope that very soon their prosecutors will have access.
Okay, you've seen some of these images, and I'm assuming President Zelensky has seen some of these images as well. What has been his reaction?
It's a human reaction. I mean, you don't have to be. The president's reaction is no different from a housekeeper reaction. It's a common human reaction. It's shocking. It is trying to understand why, because I mean, clearly some of the dead. I mean, what struck me the most is the dead person next to a bicycle. I mean, clearly you're not riding a bicycle to attack, Russian troops. So it's just very hard to understand why is this happening. It's pure brutality. There is no, military necessity to do all these. That is the reaction, and of course anger at the occupiers.
Yeah, I mean, it must obviously be very, very difficult. I mean, is it clear that the Russians are pulling back?
Sorry?
Is it clear that the Russians are pulling back, or are they simply regrouping, do you think?
They're pulling back in some regions, like Kiev Oblast. Like I said, the whole Kiev region is free from Russians now. And they are pulling back to Belarus, to Russia. They are regrouping, and then they are aimed to strike at Donbass. That's true. They're amassing their forces. They're preparing to concentrate all their efforts, because before we had them coming into Ukraine from the north, from the east, and from the south. So they clearly failed to achieve any military, a goal, right? At the north, they are having very troublesome advance at the south, not even advance, they're stopped there in the south. So the only region where the only part of Ukraine where they having some progress is the east. So now they are concentrating all their efforts. So they're pulling from north in this case, and they're concentrating their efforts to strike at the east, to encircle our military in Donbass.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of speculation that potentially there could be a meeting between President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, possibly in Turkey. Are you aware of this, and is this something that is on the cards?
The only Ukrainian representatives who can comment on this is the president himself and the negotiation group. I know that the two negotiation groups from the Ukrainian side and from the Russian side, they met recently in Turkey, as you know, and they are continuing to work together online. I think they did it yesterday. I'm not sure about today. They met online. And eventually, the outcome of their work should be a meeting between two presidents. But at this point, I have nothing to say yet about it.
Right, okay. But if you say the outcome hopefully will be a meeting between the two presidents at some stage, if that does not happen, if peace talks do not move to a point where you could get some kind of ceasefire, is the fear of President Zelensky that there could be some kind of chemical or even a nuclear strike from the Russians?
I think there is a certain, I mean, it is really worrying that Russians are speaking about chemical weapon or biological weapon being developed in Ukraine, which is clearly it's absurd accusations. Actually, no mass murder weapon is developed in Ukraine. Obviously, we're a peaceful nation. But the very fact that Russia is entering, this topic, these conversations is worrying. I don't know if we cannot foresee future, but let's hope this never happens. But the very fact that they're talking about it is somehow very worrying.
Indeed. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Mr. Nikiforov, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Spokesman for President Zelensky there. Now, later this month, a 4-part drama based on the extraordinary story of John and Anne Darwin will be shown on ITV. John was the canoeist reported missing by his wife exactly 20 years ago. He had, in fact, faked his own death in order to claim life insurance and avoid imminent bankruptcy. Well, the series stars Eddie Marsan as John Darwin, and I'm going to be talking to Eddie in a moment. But first, here's a look at the thief, his wife, and the canoe.
All I ever wanted was a simple life.
I'm going to fake my death. What could be simpler?
I begged him to turn himself in. Where have you decided to live when it's all calmed down?
Next bloody door!
Genius! Hopes are fading in the search for John Darwin.
We should never give up hope, should we, Mum?
He'll be absolutely fine.
Full English, please.
It was all going to his plan.
Gotcha!
You want me to exploit people's genuine sympathy for your benefit?
Well, obviously don't put it like that, but yes.
What could possibly go wrong?
What the?
Could you tell me who I need to speak to about making a life insurance claim?
Nice bit of facial hair there. I mean, it's an amazing story, isn't it, Eddie? I mean, you've said that the story, if it weren't fact, you think it was unbelievable. What was it like getting into the mind of this character?
The most fascinating thing about John Darwin was that he was faced with bankruptcy, and because he had such a fragile ego, rather than just accept bankruptcy, he came up with this crazy idea of faking his own death. But there was nothing beyond that. He never thought of long-term consequences. He never thought of what it would do for his children, what it would do to his wife. It was just kind of an instinctive response to the idea of being humiliated.
What's the most unbelievable bit of the story, do you think?
What he did to his children, I think.
Right.
That he lived next door for 4 or 5 years. He listened to his sons grieve over his death, to spend Christmases talking about him, and he was just next door listening the whole time.
Yeah, you've suggested that it's also quite a divisive story as well, and the dramatisation brings that out. What's the most divisive part of it, do you think?
Well, the debate is about the culpability of Anne Darwin.
Yes. Yeah.
I think the drama gives a kind of sympathetic narrative to her. I think I personally have a lot of sympathy for her. I think she married him at a very young age. She very early on their relationship dynamic was kind of set in stone. And when she was sentenced, the law said that coercion, in order for coercion to be proven, somebody had to be in the room when they were coercion. Now they realise that that's not true, that coercion can be remote. It can be, you don't have to be in the room. So she wouldn't have been given such a harsh sentence now, I think.
All right, okay. I mean, there is a subtle element to it as well, and the way that the clips there, they suggest that it's, you know, a sort of a comic drama. But it's a tragedy as well, particularly, as you say, the way that the children were treated.
It is. The great thing about this drama and the challenge is that it's funny and tragic and weird. I think Richard Laxton, the director, and Chris Lang, the writer, have done a brilliant job in finding that balance. And I think Monica Dolan, who I think is one of the greatest actors of our generation, I think she's amazing as Anne, because the whole debate about the culpability of Anne is expressed through Monica's performance.
Right, okay. I mean, you've been on the BBC recently, of course, in the hit drama Ridley Road, a series about the anti-fascist group in the 1980s. I think we've got a clip of that to play our viewers now.
You know what that is?
No.
That's a yeshiva. A school for Jewish boys. But there's no signs. No Hebrew, no Star of David, nothing. Because if there were, they wouldn't be able to deal with the death threats.
It received rave reviews, but you received a lot of abuse.
I received some abuse, yeah. I mean, what happened was Sarah Soleimani, the writer, she was a friend of mine, and she said to me that we were both aware of the rise in anti-Semitism, and she said that on social media is a perpetual argument because of its reductive nature, and she wanted to combat anti-Semitism with persuasion, and you do that with art, through a novel or through a film. And so she wrote the series of Ridley Road, and what she brilliantly did was she took the language of anti-Semitism from the 21st century and she placed it in the stories of the 60s. And if you make a film about racists in the 1960s and you do it so ingeniously, you're going to provoke a reaction, and that's what happened. But I'm not Jewish, so I went on from playing a Jewish cab driver to playing John Darwin going off in my canoe. But my Jewish friends, they are Jewish, and they can't go away from it. They get it all the time. So that's what happened. There was a reaction to it. But the rise of anti-Semitism, my Jewish friends are going through it all the time.
But you're an actor playing a part. But the assumption is, possibly because you did play the role so brilliantly, potentially, that people put the two together.
No, I don't think they knew. I don't think they thought I was Jewish. The issue was
they just wanted to sound off.
Yeah, well, the issue was I remember one guy saying to me, "Why are the BBC making a film about this and not a film about the Israeli-Palestinian debate?" And you say, "Well, because this is a film about British citizens in the 1960s facing racism. It's got nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian debate." But they conflate the two, and in many ways, one justifies the abuse. The anti-Semitic abuse.
Yeah, all right. Well, it's good to see you, Eddie. Thank you so much for coming in and talking about your new ITV programme on a fascinating story. Many thanks for that. Thank you. Now, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan came together in the shadow of the Cold War and nuclear Armageddon, and there's a new BBC series about their relationship beginning tonight.
Thatcher and Reagan both believed that the West had to deal with the Soviets from a position of strength. This would require a massive expansion of the US nuclear arsenal.
Our deep ties and perceptions we share give us much to talk about. Together we're confronting an extremely grave international situation. We do so with determination and optimism.
That's Thatcher and Reagan, a very special relationship, with her biographer Charles Moore, starting on BBC Two tonight at 9 p.m. Now we're expecting the Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng to set out the government's energy security strategy to try to secure the UK's future energy supplies and bring down costs for households and industry. Well, Labour Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds is with me now. Thanks for coming in. It's good to see you. Businesses, they're not protected by the energy price cap, are they? And they're facing a rise in energy costs of anything from 500 to 600%. You're talking about a windfall tax dealing with this crisis. Is that really going to work, given that you've got so much more to spend the windfall tax on?
Well, absolutely. It's nice to join you this morning, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I sit here this morning, Clive, and I feel angry at the scale of the crisis people in this country are facing and the lack of response from government in the spring statement and promises of things, announcements in future just won't cut it. We have set out that windfall tax that would give households a huge amount of help relative to what the government are doing, up to £600 for households who are most affected by energy prices. But we put in that a contingency fund for businesses, a £600 million contingency fund for businesses, which is necessary because all businesses are exposed to these higher energy prices. But for energy intensives, the situation is so extreme that some of them are even considering, are they competitive? Can they continue production? And of course, when you add that to the national insurance rise that the government went ahead with in the spring statement, this is a really serious situation. The energy statement, by the way, will deal with long-term issues of supply. I understand it. It will not be about help now. And the government has to understand the scale of that crisis.
Okay, interesting. You talk about help now, the one-off tax, windfall tax, that will deal with the issue to begin with. But what about longer term? Once you've run out of that money, what happens to those businesses? Are they on their own?
An absolutely fair challenge. The long-term strategy has to be a much better energy policy than we've had in this country for the last 12 years. So we've set out, on terms of what Labour's plans are, that big climate investment pledge that Rachel Reeves made at Labour Party conference. We would spend that on things like, first of all, energy efficiency, because there's a massive amount that can be done to lower this country's demand for gas, which is the huge problem in terms of gas prices and the pressure on heating bills that people are facing. But also, yes, we would, for instance, not have that ban on onshore wind, which has cost the country some of the cheapest forms of electricity generation that are available. We'd continue the expansion of offshore wind. That's been a good story for the country, but we don't have enough of those good stories, and that's what a real industrial policy should do. This government hasn't gotten enough.
Okay, you talk about a long-term energy policy. It's going to take time to get that sorted out. Once you've run out the windfall tax money, what happens to those businesses? Are they going to be on their own?
Well, first of all, the windfall tax is about the here and now. The investment pledge is about the future. But of course, the situation that we've got at the minute, the windfall tax that we put forward, we want to raise £1.2 billion with that to give households and businesses this help. To be frank, that would raise more money than we initially forecast because, frankly, prices have risen even beyond the extortionate levels they'd hit when we made that announcement. So we've got real support now and the long-term plan for the future. I simply say the government's got neither.
So much uncertainty in the energy market at the moment. Russian supplies to Europe, they could be cut off. They could decide they're not going to have any more. As a result, that means that they're going to be competing for those energy markets that we're competing for as well. The Germans, the Austrians, the Dutch, they're talking about plans to potentially ration oil and gas. Should we be preparing to do the same?
We should be making those plans, and the government should be preparing, not necessarily in public, for that situation. There's a lot of complacency in this country about the relative lower exposure to Russian gas that we have. But we should bear in mind, part of the supply that comes to this country from, for instance, Norway or from the liquefied natural gas that comes into the terminals in Wales. That is partly because Russian gas is fulfilling the demand in Central Europe.
So you can see rationing of energy supplies in this country?
I think what the government should announce is a plan which is not simply shopping from one authoritarian regime to the next for fossil fuels, but that long-term plan on renewables, on nuclear, on energy efficiency that would make the difference. But let's be clear, looking at the images coming out of Ukraine right now, I don't think we should be talking about going back to business as usual, where we just buy large quantities of fossil fuels from Russians. I think we've got to be aware of what has gone on here, and this is an incredibly serious event.
Okay, so we should be thinking about rationing energy in the United Kingdom. What about practical steps? The Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, he's talked about introducing car-free Sundays this month. Would Labour support something like that, an initiative?
Well, I worry, I don't want to dismiss other countries' plans, but I would worry that fundamentally those might not meet the scale of the challenge. What we could be announcing, what I wanted to see in the spring statement, rationing should be an extreme option.
Not enough. Actually shutting down
I think
cars moving on a Sunday.
Well, what we should be talking about is the steps, the policy steps. Only governments can meet the demand and the problems that the country is facing. We could have, for instance, had a statement from the Chancellor talking about how we will accelerate energy efficiency, how we will be providing a real market so that more people can use non-fossil fuel-based heating. I mean, the market there just isn't there. You've got to look as a government, is the level of public investment sufficient to draw in that private investment to make the market? Is the regulatory regime sufficient? And on many, many aspects of that net zero transition, it just isn't there from the government. So initiatives and emergency plans, of course, they've got to be part of it. But the main thing is, has the government got fundamentally an energy plan for the here and now to address these problems? That's what I want to see from the government.
Do you believe that if Carrie Johnson is issued with a fine for parties during lockdown, do you think she should be named?
Yes, I think anyone who's been in Downing Street should be named if they have been part of this. What the country wants to know. What the country wants to know.
She's not a politician. Well, she's not a minister.
I think people want to know. All they want to know is some transparency as to what really went on in Downing Street. We were told in Parliament. Prime Minister told us in Parliament he was not aware of any parties. So what we've seen so far with the fixed penalty notices that have come out to relatively junior civil servants, look, the culture here was set from the top. And all people want to know is, has the Prime Minister been truthful, and has Downing Street as an institution been following the same rules?
Exactly. You've suggested the culture was set from the top. But junior officials, Carrie Johnson, a private citizen, why should their names be made public in relation to this? It wouldn't happen in any other walk of life if you're a private citizen.
But I don't think being that the Prime Minister, I think living in Downing Street is comparable to any other walk of life. And I think, again, because there's been so much dishonesty, so much obfuscation from the people at the top in Downing Street, from the Prime Minister and his immediate circle downwards, I think people just want to know what really went on. Let's have some transparency. Let's have some honesty. You know, honesty and integrity matter in any job. They matter especially if you're the Prime Minister and you and your family and your operation are part of that. I think that's all the public want, and that's entirely reasonable for them to expect that.
OK. Jonathan Reynolds, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Now, Russian forces may have abandoned the retired Chernobyl nuclear plant this week, but they still have control of Europe's largest plant, that's Zaporizhzhia, in a city where yesterday there were reports of explosions and protesters being violently dispersed. Well, I asked Ukraine's Energy Minister, Herman Halushenko, if he was worried about the site.
Of course, yes. And there are several things concerning Zaporizhzhia. First of all, is how they captured it. They really shell it by tanks, by other heavy vehicles, and it was really very, very dangerous from the point of view of nuclear safety and all. Now they have there at the station, at the site, around from 300 to 500 soldiers who are at the station. Because that is really a big threat. We see that their presence here, it's really, really a very dangerous issue.
There is fighting going on near the plant. How worried are you about the possibility of a nuclear accident?
We got information that they already wounded some people there, and so to be frank, they behave like mad guys.
Can you confirm Russian troops have now left the site at Chernobyl?
That's true. That's true. Today we already raised Ukrainian flag there, and so this information is confirmed. They did it yesterday, and they left. But what we know, I mean, from our information, we have the information that they were now in Gomin, which is in Belarus, and now they in some clinics trying to get some medicine, some health due to what they are doing there in this zone. We really do not know exactly what they're doing, but probably they are digging the soil there. They dig in, and probably they get some kind of radiation there.
I mean, is there a moral obligation, do you think, on the part of the UK and the EU to stop buying Russian oil and gas?
I think yes, and that's even not. Of course, it's moral now, but before that's what we declare and we discuss in all meetings, that in this situation when you depend on Russian dramatically, and you have the monopoly of Gazprom in Europe. You allowed them to build this Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. You want to increase this dependence. And when we only had that this is not a question of policy, this is a question of economy, it sounds ridiculous. And we said this, that this is dependence which allowed Russia to play their dirty game.
The UK says it's ending its dependence on Russian gas by the end of the year, and the EU is phasing out its use of imports by 2/3. Is that fast enough?
I can say, of course not. Of course, we want to do it, let's say, yesterday. But we also understand the situation. What is very important now, what we see, that even if EU cannot decrease or stop stop buying Russian gas and oil, the most important things, whether Russia receive money now, right now, because when they receive money, so they just use this money to kill our people, and that is really incredible. I mean, in this situation, at least freeze their money.
But what would you say to those families in Europe who are facing rising energy costs and who would have to pay more if their countries do end supplies coming from Russia?
Concerning the prices, that's the price of your freedom. So don't think that you would pay less or you pay more, it would save you from Russian invasion. Don't think this.
Mr. Halushenko, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, let's pick up on some of those points now with the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, who joins me. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Yeah, Herman Halushenko there, saying that high energy costs, potentially, in parts of Europe are the price of freedom. Do you agree with that?
It is true that I think that freedom doesn't come free, and that we're seeing the world's global energy prices respond. Although, actually, in the case of the UK, we're not actually buying very much of our energy, hardly any gas, and no petrol, and 18% of our diesel. But that doesn't matter. The international price is affected nonetheless. And it does show that there's an enormous impact from what's going on in Ukraine. But I think if you don't stop Putin there, if Putin carries on, then things would be much worse still.
Yeah, I mean, the situation in some of the liberated areas in northern Ukraine seems to be appalling, some of the pictures that are coming out. Does it look to you as if potentially war crimes have been committed?
Well, I've been in touch with my opposite number, the infrastructure minister, Alexandra Kobrakov, in the last, throughout, but most recently last night. He was talking about the pictures that are emerging. He's in Kyiv himself, so he's speaking to people who are coming to see him, who've been first-hand witnesses. It defies, belief in Europe in the 21st century that these sorts of acts could be committed. I think it's incredibly important, even in these war-torn times, that this is documented as far as possible, because it's important that we have the ability as a global community to follow up on this afterwards. But the positive is that Putin's forces are being pushed back in various different places, and Kubikov was able to confirm that to me. What we're seeing as they fled is quite horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, you've acknowledged that the energy situation is problematic, even though we don't get a lot of our oil and gas from the Russians. So that's going to cause problems for consumers. The Bank of England is talking about inflation getting higher this year. Energy bills are likely to rise when we see a review of the energy price cap in October. I mean, is it fair to say that the cost of living could actually get significantly worse than it already is?
Well, I think we are clearly, fighting what is a global pressure on prices. Having said that, we've seen something like £22 billion of support come in for British families from the Chancellor, most recently last week, announcing a number of additional measures to try to keep the cap on this. And we get it. I mean, this is going to be difficult. We can't fix everything, but we'll do whatever we can to ease the strains, and that's been our approach, and how that 22 billion, of which 9.1 billion has been for keeping energy prices down as far as possible, although we're not in full control of that, as the global economy shows.
OK, but you're talking about what you've done to deal with the problems that have just happened. I'm talking about the future and the situation potentially getting worse. The Prime Minister has said in relation to the rising cost of living, as we go forward, we need to do more. What do you think he means by that?
I think that's right. I mean, in the sort of longer term and medium term, we've got this energy strategy. We're going to see that later this week from the Prime Minister. And we're going to look at, you know, we have, for example, an immense and invisible source of national power in our seas, which is the wind power. We produce more of it than any other country in the world. I think we could go a lot further still. I think we could look at nuclear, in particular small nuclear reactors. I think we're going to see more of that as well. And I think actually what Putin's done is a wake-up call to the West, because we have been, as a Western world, over-reliant, although not Britain in particular as it happens, but certainly Europe, Germany in particular, massively over-reliant on Russian hydrocarbons, and we are paying the price for that.
But the Prime Minister wasn't talking about the energy strategy, and you're talking about the longer term there in relation to that. He was talking about as we go forward in the medium term. John Redwood, for instance, he says, let's hope talk of an emergency budget to tackle the cost of living crisis leads to action. Is he right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we've just literally had the spring statement, which is exactly that.
But this is beyond that. This is going beyond that. He's actually talking about an emergency budget to go beyond the spring statement.
Yeah, well, I was about to say it wouldn't have been the case if you were planning it 6 months ago that you would have the Chancellor would have done the huge numbers of things he did with, you know, things like the warm homes discount and the cold weather payments, enabling, for example, national insurance to be raised to the point where you don't pay where you don't pay your PAYEs. That's another £350 a year into people's pockets. These are measures that wouldn't have been taken, I think it's right to say, fair to say, if we weren't facing this cost of living energy crisis. And there are many, many others besides. Yeah. You know, when you count up the number of measures, there are literally, well, probably 100 different things that the government has done so far. And I don't rule out the fact that we may need to do more still. As I said before, we can't fix everything.
Sure.
But we will do what we can to ease these pressures.
OK, you make the point that the government may have to look at things further. The Resolution Foundation, it said, as a result of the spring statement, 1.3 million people, including 500,000 children, are at risk of falling below the poverty line. I mean, is it the government's job to stop that happening?
Well, the government, of course, has a big role to play. There are always arguments about whether you're talking about absolute poverty or relative poverty.
This is absolute poverty. This is absolute poverty we're talking about here. No distinction.
I was going to say, the most important thing is to make sure you lift people out of poverty entirely. And I'll give you one measure, for example, that we've taken that means that somebody who is working 16 hours a week is going to be £1,600 better off after the action we've taken, £1,600 a year better off after the action we've taken, because we've changed the taper for the universal credit, for example. We've upped the national living wage. So we are very proactively doing a whole bunch of things to try to assist. If you look at things like disability support, we provide the highest level of disability support amount spent per size of the economy in the G7, £64 billion a year. These are not facts that most people will realise, but we are trying to help the people who are most badly impacted by this cost of living change.
But one way you could actually help people is by cutting taxes. And it does seem a bit odd that a Conservative government isn't seemingly willing to do that. Surely that's a better way of getting growth going.
Yeah, first of all, that is to ignore the fact that we are literally about to raise the national insurance threshold so that you can earn all of your money up to £12,570, so 12.5 grand, without paying any national insurance at all. That is raising the tax base, cutting taxes effectively, as you describe it. I think it's also, fair to acknowledge that after coronavirus. I was just going to say, I think it's only fair to acknowledge after coronavirus, people will not forgive us if we are not able to get on top of the NHS backlog. And people, I think, are willing to see their money used for that, and that's specifically what the national insurance money is going to be.
Exactly, you're saying you're cutting taxes. The Resolution Foundation says after the spring statement, 7 out of 8 workers will pay more in income tax and national insurance by the end of this Parliament.
So if you take, for example, the national insurance threshold from July, which is that amount which is going to provide actually £330 more a year, that's raising that figure. That means 70% of workers be better off even after the health and social care levy. So that's the increase in tax that's going to pay to get rid of the NHS backlog and actually sort out a long-term problem, which is long-term care, which no government's actually ever managed to tackle, and we finally are. But 70% people will be better off taking into account that rise in national insurance, so you can earn over 12,500 without paying any tax. So actually, overall, we are trying to do this so that people who are least well off who benefit the most, and we accept that there are costs involved in rescuing the NHS from the backlogs.
Yeah, well, we've talked about disruption in the global energy markets. The Poles, the French, the Germans, they're beginning a process looking at rationing energy. And we've just heard Labour suggest that might be a good idea to look at those kinds of proposals. Do you think it's a good idea? We should be looking at rationing energy.
No, I don't. I think some in Europe, the Germans in particular, are very exposed to Russian energy. They may get 40 or 50% of their.
Can you absolutely rule it out happening in the UK? I mean, as you say, we're not as open to shocks directly from Russia as a result of the fact that we don't get as much oil and gas from them as other countries. But those countries pulling out of Russia, they're going to be looking at other sources that we're competing for as well. So it's going to get harder. We've acknowledged that. So can you completely rule out rationing?
Yes, I can. It's not the route that we want to go down. I'll give you one very good example. We have more wind farms in this country than any other country in the world. The Saudi Arabia of wind, as I've heard the Prime Minister describe it. And actually, this is an immense, invisible national resource that we can exploit much more. I've been out to see these wind farms on the sea, and they are, incredible, sizable. The wind is generally much better out to sea than on shore, and we have plenty of coastline. So that's a very good prospect. We're able in this country, I think, to go further with things like nuclear power. Modular nuclear reactors, I think, could be extremely helpful. But to answer your question absolutely up front, no, we don't see rationing being part of our approach to this, and nor should it be.
All right.
But we do have to make sure we invest in energy, and that's what the strategy will do later this week.
Sure. I mean, you're talking about Saudi, we're the Saudi Arabia of wind. What about onshore wind farms? The Prime Minister's reported to be in favour of those. What are your thoughts?
Maybe places where it's appropriate, but by and large,
so you agree? You agree with that? You agree with that
Well,
suggestion?
I think I was going to say the end of that sentence was, by and large, I think it's better to build significant wind power offshore. I think that's where it performs better because it tends to be windier. Apart from anything else, you can buy it, you can build it at huge mass, much bigger than it could ever be onshore. So I think that's the sort of direction of travel when it comes to producing the large amounts. But there may be occasions onshore where a certain amount of wind makes sense. But I don't think we want to sort of cover every inch of land in onshore wind farms. I don't think that would be particularly desirable.
Yeah, I'm sure
the most sensible policy.
Yeah, I'm sure the Prime Minister is not suggesting every inch of land, but he seems to want, it's suggested, wind farms onshore. Does he know your opinions on this, that perhaps you disagree with him on this?
If you don't mind, perhaps I'll have the conversation in a week's time. I think you'll find our opinions are very closely aligned on this.
Would you have a nuclear power station in your constituency, if that was possible?
Yes, I don't know if it's possible, but I would say that the one thing that's always struck me about nuclear power, I don't have my Hertfordshire constituency doesn't have a nuclear power station, and I'd always rather assumed that no one would ever want them. In fact, when I speak to my colleagues who have a history of having nuclear power, they are universally popular. They typically want the upgraded new one because they provide incredible very, very highly paid, very high-tech jobs, lots of science involved. And of course, when they're built to British standards, are extremely safe as well. So they tend to be popular where they're there. I imagine unpopular before you build them. But,
I mean, I just wonder, how are you dealing with the cost of living crisis? Are you having to turn the thermostat down a little bit more? Lots of people are.
Look, I totally appreciate how much of a squeeze this is having. You only have to sort of look at the cost of fuel for the house, fuel for the car. It's very clear that it's that this is going to be very tight. I don't want to underplay that in any way, shape, or form. I said we can't fix everything, but we'll ease whatever we can.
All right, we'll leave it there. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, many thanks. Well, that's it for today. Thanks to all my guests. Sophie will be back here next week. I hope you can join her then. Bye-bye.